Hello, and welcome to Rapid Fire, a podcast hosted by Fire-Dex, dedicated to sharing best practices and lessons learned in hopes of making firefighting a little bit safer. I'm your host, Bob Keys, retired Battalion Chief from FDNY. We're fortunate to be joined today by Battalion Chief Andy Starnes of the Charlotte Fire Department, who is also the founder of Insight Fire Training. Before we get started, I'd like to ask Andy to take a minute or less and tell everyone an interesting fact about his career.
Well, thanks, Bob, for having me. Thank you to the Fire-Dex family and all your support. The interesting fact about my career is that my career was born out of chasing my dad around and basically going to the fire station to hang out. And I had nothing to do with becoming a firefighter. My first monkey bars was a 1978 American LaFrance, where while they were in meetings, our game was, can we crawl from this fire truck to the last fire truck in the bay without touching the ground and not get hurt? And, you know, I'm crawling over metal and hose and all this at 8 years old. And now I got a daughter who's 11. I'm like, don't touch that. You'll get hurt. You know, don't go over there. So I'm such a helicopter parent where when I was her age, I was doing much more daredevil stuff. But the interesting thing about my career is that it all began because I just wanted to spend time with my family, my father. So I think if your heart's in the right place, your career is born out of that. And that's how mine started, was basically trying to seek out that love for what he had and why, and sharing that. So that's where I got my start, and it's been an amazing ride. It'll be 30 years this year since I started as a 16-year-old junior firefighter. And you may have to hang up the hat one day, but you don't have to hang up your heart in what you do. As you know well, Bob, it's all about being a servant and helping others. So thank you for allowing me to share today.
Appreciate that you've taken time out of your very, very busy schedule and away from your family to be able to share what you've learned in your career in the fire service and your outstanding program you do training firefighters across all 50 states in this country with Insight Fire Training. As I said to you the other day, I don't have experience in wearing anything other than 3-layer structural gear for any of the fires or emergencies that I responded to in my 31 years at FDNY. We were never issued anything else to wear. It's either station wear or 3-layer structural gear. You have shared with me that you've had opportunities to wear 2-layer alternative PPE and are very fond of it. Can you give us some examples of where it really, really makes a difference in reducing that cardiovascular strain on yourself and then on your firefighters?
Well, before we talk about that, we have to have a comparison. So I think you made a good statement there. Said you wore that 3-layer gear for 31 years. And when we only have that perspective, we really don't know anything else, right? So I wore 3-layer gear at my current department. I've been there 23 years, and the old joke is it's so thick you could walk through Hades and get a suntan and never feel anything, right? So it's overbuilt, if that makes sense. But Al Huxley, a famous humanist, said what science has actually done is given us better ways to get ourselves killed. And that's my paraphrase of some of our gear, because our gear is so good at protecting us from thermal insult. It actually stops some other things that our body normally needs to do. And I had no clue. I'm just being brutally honest about 2-layer gear or 1-layer gear and the benefits of it until I started wearing it, doing our live burn training. And I've always learned about TPP, but never understood THL. No one ever talked about it, why it was important. Well, I'm 45 years old, about to have my 46th birthday, and you go, we like to drop dead from 47 to 55. For what reason? Cardiac issues. And if you look, why are those cardiac issues occurring? We are stressing ourselves, overexertion, and our heart is maxed out. And what is our skin and heart not able to do when we wear 3-layer gear? It doesn't allow that sweat to evaporate and your body to do what it's supposed to.
Andy, can you get a little deeper into THL, total heat loss, and TPP, thermal protective performance? I'm sure there's many firefighters that will listen to this podcast that have never heard those terms before. So if you could just enlighten all of us, that would be great.
I would say that, for a young firefighter, I didn't understand it. And like I said, I've been in my current job 23 years now and been in the volunteers prior to that and never understood turnout gear the way I do now. And the thing that we do when we teach our thermal imaging class, we spend the first hour talking about heat and personal protective equipment. And it's mind boggling because we asked them really two questions that rocks their world. One, what was the temperature of the last hallway you crawled? Why should you care? And two, have you ever read this? And we hold up a red and white manual that says FEMSA on it. And it's the instructions for their turnout gear. And the majority of them say no. And if you look at the actual IFSTA, Fire, Jones and Bartlett, all of them, when they get into PPE, they don't dig down into this. They talk about the 3 layers and how it works, but they don't talk about these 2 acronyms you just hammered, and they're critical for us to understand. TPP is thermal protective performance. So it means how well I'm protected against thermal insult up to flashover temperatures until my body receives a 2nd degree burn. And it's rated basically, NFPA minimum is 35. So whatever number your gear has, you divide that by 2, and you have supposedly that many seconds until you receive a 2nd degree burn in flashover temperatures. And that's really a false sense of security. We'll talk about why here in a minute. But THL is usually an inverse relationship. Normally your TPP goes up and your THL goes down. THL is like your body's ability to sweat and that sweat to evaporate off of you. So evaporation equals cooling. Well, if I'm sweating and I'm absorbing heat, if I have high THL, all this stuff comes off of me and I feel better. It allows that vapor to come off of me and the gear to breathe. And if you've ever wore something that didn't breathe well, doesn't smell well at the end of the day, and you don't feel well, it's like the wrestlers used to wear garbage bags when they tried to lose weight. That's my analogy. But what you have with gear like TechGen and Fire-Dex is you have high TPP and high THL, which is something you haven't seen. A lot of manufacturers have copied it and you see it, but I can tell you the difference in high THL is the difference between going in, doing a burn, come back out, talk to some firefighters, I cool off and I go right back in and I feel great. Versus I wear high TPP and low THL gear. I go in and super high temperatures, my gear absorbs all that heat. I come out, I don't come out of my gear, it holds all that heat, transfers it to where? To me. And then I go right back in and I don't do what they tell me to do, which is come out of my gear. The gear is already saturated. What happens to me the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th burn? I go in as an instructor. You know how many after action reviews we've done of firefighters who've been burned because they did what we just described? They went in with high TPP gear that had low THL and never realized their gear was saturated with energy. And that's just from the burn perspective. That's not talking about the overall damage to your heart and all that. And I think it's fascinating to me that the 3 letters TPP go as far back as 1967 to Alice Stoll's work, and firefighters don't know it. She's probably the most significant contributor to our well-being and protection, and nobody knows her name. She's the reason why the word 2nd degree burn was basically coined. You know, now we call it partial thickness or whatever, but she wanted to know a better way to protect fighter pilots when they crashed their plane to protect them from burning alive. So she was developing fabrics to protect them. And her work called Heat Transfer Through Fabrics, if you find a copy of that, by the way, let me know. The last one I found was $900 for this little 40, 50-page book. So she needed human victims to burn them on their arm. Nobody would sign up for it. Imagine that. But she worked at the U.S. Naval Academy, so she voluntold 260-something sailors, and they burned them on the arm right here, and she measured when that burn occurred, how long, and whatnot. And that's where your TPP data comes from today. They don't obviously use human victims anymore. They use sensors and things that measure from calories to centimeters squared and how fast that energy is transferred. But to put it all into something we can understand is at 131 degrees, my skin receives a 2nd degree burn when my gear is saturated. And if I don't move away from that gear, I'm the baked potato, and my skin increases to 140 and my pain receptors are turned off. So if I'm going to use my ears, my hand, or whatever they're teaching this week to measure temperature, it quits working at 140 because it's a safety feature in my body. It's called fight or flight. And at 162 degrees, my skin is destroyed. So having high TPP with no understanding of it is actually a detriment to firefighters because they're so well protected, it's to their own demise, because by the time they feel heat, it's too late. And the victim is already, my God, what's happened to them? If I don't feel pain until 500 degrees, what about the little child laying there in Spider-Man pajamas? So TPP and THL are critical. And that's why we did that webinar. You guys saw it. We put it on our YouTube channel, Understanding Firefighter PPE. It's free. You can watch it. It's an hour and 45 minutes long, but it breaks down things that I never knew personally as a firefighter. I don't know about you, Bob. I wasn't taught it. We were taught all these different skills, but I wasn't taught how the very thing that protects me works. And that was not good, because we would push it way past it. And then I don't know about you, we didn't take care of it either. So, and we expected it to perform well and it was dirty and not cared for. So the summation is TPP and THL are basically three acronyms firefighters should know, just like life, incident, property, and condition, action, needs, and all their other acronyms. They should know it because it's their very life insurance when they fight fire.
Thank you very much for breaking that down into what we call fireman speak. It's difficult to digest for me, and I'm sure lots of firefighters appreciate your practical hands-on education about this topic. For myself, I didn't learn about TPP and THL until the 29th year of my 31-year career. And that's when I took over as Chief of Research and Development at FDNY. We had just gone through a very long pilot program to find new, more dexterous gloves for the firefighters. And after testing them for over a year, we issued them to the department. And unbeknownst to us, the manufacturer had changed the Nomex out and put in a very lightweight rayon. And we wound up with 13 firefighters burned in the same spot of the back of their hand over the next year. And during that year, it was my responsibility to not only find out how this could have happened, but why it happened and what actually happened. For me, that was a very steep learning curve into the NFPA's protocols, UL certification. It was quite a tough time in my career, but very rewarding to be able to figure things out and share that information with guys and girls in the field. So can we take all of what we just talked about and take one giant step forward into the world of alternative PPE? You did a great job explaining how three-layer structural gear works, but we know that 90% of the calls that firefighters go on do not require that third layer at all, that there are no thermal insults needed to be protected from at an EMS run, certainly no thermal insults at an elevator emergency. Can you talk through, from your firsthand experience, how and why using alternative non-structural gear at calls that you respond to is saving firefighters from that cardiovascular injury or that heat exhaustion that is that you explained before is so critical, and it is what's killing firefighters?
Well, and it's a great question, and I think the first thing we need to start with is it is not a new concept. If we study history and study other fire departments, as I've traveled and seen firefighters overseas, they work in a layered concept of their protection. They wear basically a jumpsuit all day, which is a single layer version of turnout gear. And some of them have different versions of it. Some of them wear station wear that's counted as part of their actual TPP because it's made of FR rated stuff. But the single layer turnout gear that we're talking about is something that's a single suit or zip up suit or two-piece suit that they can wear for the calls you mentioned, like EMS calls, extrication runs. And I think one of the things that people miss in the value of this is, okay, let's think outside the box and say to the people who say, well, I don't need that. They have turnout gear. Why would they need turnout gear? Number one, let's go to Houston in the middle of summer and say, okay, not only do you have to wear your turnout gear on every fire alarm run, but you're going to wear your turnout gear on extrication calls, possibly some tough EMS runs, all that. You got a big issue with cross-contamination to start with. You're taking stuff, germs and things in and out of the cab and who knows where. If you look at Jennifer, she recently got married. I can't remember her last name, but she did the phenomenal work on firefighter cancer exposures in Ottawa. She did a phenomenal job of showing how much carcinogenic materials were inside the cab of the fire truck. The fire truck was like the nastiest place that we were exposed to. And we're getting in and out, we're wearing the same boots in and out, into the day room, into the bedroom. Everybody knows they're not supposed to take their turnout gear in the bedroom, but we're wearing the same shoes and the same stuff all over the station and cross-contaminating. So they don't think about that. Number two, if you're something like a Houston firefighter who's dealing with 100-degree, 90% humidity days, and they're wearing the highest TPP gear they can wear on fire alarms, and they're saturated with sweat. And they're wearing this gear on extrication calls, and it's saturated with sweat. Now, let's fast forward a couple hours later. This gear is soaking wet, sitting inside of a hot cab, and they run a fire call. And it turns out to be an actual fire. What have we done to their level of protection and their fatigue level by making them wear this gear all day long instead of a lighter weight gear when they could wear it on those less threatening calls. And then if they, God forbid, get in an environment where there is a lot of heat and thermal insult, where they need that thermal protective performance, what did we do if that gear is soaking wet with sweat? Well, somebody figured that out. A recent study shows that you can drop your thermal protective performance of your gear by as much as 10 seconds if your gear is saturated with sweat. Because what's the greatest conductor of heat? Salt water. So basically, I don't have 3 layers. I have 2. And once those are saturated with energy, it hits that wet gear, and then it begins to transfer that energy faster to me. So to me, it's a no-brainer. Yeah, is it going to take up more room? Firefighters are going to have to get used to it, changing out. Yes. And what did Brendan Sini say? The 2 things we hate: change and the way things are. But I can tell you, if you want to make them believers in it, give it to them. Let them try it out. That's how I became a believer in it and started feeling better, dramatically better at the end of the day, especially fire departments that work 48, 96 shifts. They need something to lessen the fatigue, lessen the insult, and just overexertion on their heart and their bodies. And single layer is one of those ways we can do that, along with good wellness programs. I think we ran 140,000 calls last year as a fire department, and 99,000 of them were EMS related. It could have been car accidents, it could have been a stubbed toe, it could have been delivering a baby, could have been any number of things. But we are wearing turnout gear on some of those calls. And we could make their jobs a lot easier and the stress on them and exertion on them a lot less by giving them a set of gear that allows them to do that. We already do that now thanks to COVID with the single layer exposure suits that are, multiple use, where we were throwing away these suits every time. So why don't we do that with our extrication and EMS calls and high angle incidents and anything that we don't need the thermal protective performance rating for? This should be a consideration, in my opinion.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that info. So on a side note, I've heard so much positive feedback from people who have attended your Insight Fire training. Tell us about how you came about founding this organization and what it is that gives you this passion and desire to help educate firefighters.
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. I don't deserve them, number one. Number two, that's a big question with a testimony style answer. I got into this for really 3 reasons: my faith, my father, and my family. So my faith showed me that, as watching my dad growing up, that volunteer firefighters give of themselves without thought, without pay, sometimes to their own detriment, sacrificing their family time, all kinds of things they sacrifice. I watched this growing up. From 8 years on, I've been chasing my dad around. So I watched this take place in front of me. I watched people do amazing things without pay, without thought of recognition. They didn't want an award. They didn't want a trophy. They just wanted to help. And they loved the fellowship and the aspect behind that. And I grew up in a community that didn't have a whole lot. So I'll try to do this without being too emotional. But so that was what drove me into it. And plus, my dad worked a full-time job. And when he was home, he was at the volunteer fire department. So that was the way I got to spend time with him. So this is a double-edged sword for me, because I learned 2 things. I learned, 1, I loved the fire department because I got to spend time with my dad. And I learned 2, when I became a dad, that I need to be home and not be at the fire department all the time. So my daughter knows I am her dad. So that's the difficult thing, because many firefighters give themselves away to the point that that's why our divorce rate is so high. My faith taught me that I need to put my faith and my family above the fire department. But it makes me a better firefighter, in my opinion, because I care. And it hurts, but I care. But my family taught me later that when I was helping my dad running a project called Kill the Flashover, I was the thermal imaging guy because they needed somebody. And I was helping him as a nonprofit research project. Had a lot of fun. I always say that my fire department trained me, but Kill the Flashover educated me. I got to hang out with people from all over the world, learning things I'd never learned before, never heard before, and getting to research it and get to do live burns with actual furniture. We were the redneck version of UL, if you will. I mean, we were using thermocouples. We were putting a couch and a chair in a house and doing everything that you see online now. We were doing that back in 2009 through 2015. And in 2015, I was helping get a house ready to burn. And I'm the guy who's supposed to make sure it's safe and everybody goes home. And I stepped on a spot in the floor that was rotted and fell through the floor and ripped my knee in half. My kneecap went 180 degrees and ruptured my patella tendon. I went from running my third marathon to my wife carrying me to the bathroom for 8 weeks, unable to walk. I learned that I was going to get 18% from my injuries from the fire department because I was off duty at a volunteer fire department with no insurance and no way of being covered for it. And by the grace of God, after 6 months, I get to come back to work. And during that 6 months, we had some very heartfelt conversations about what I will do outside of the house. She said, you already are a firefighter, but you can't live without you. Can't live on 18% disability. So sucked it up and I went to school, and I learned really quickly that it needed to be a business to protect my family. And there are a lot of firefighters who take a beating for being instructors, for charging and whatnot. Let me tell you something real quick. If you're passionate about something, what you do, there's going to be a cost, not just financially, but physically, emotionally, everything. And what you need to know is if it's really something you're called to do, you won't be happy unless you do it. But you better have your family on board, and you better protect them while you do it, because nobody else will. The fire department will write you off. Everybody will write you off when you're not valuable anymore. So make sure you have workers' comp, make sure you have long-term gap insurance, all the stuff firefighters should do. And that's how I got into it. And honestly, I did it only to hang out with my dad. And I had no idea in 2015, after falling through a floor, that I would write a thermal imaging curriculum that will be the first one in the world for firefighters. And we would go to all 50 states and teach firefighters in 16 countries. And because of Corona, we taught or interacted with 10,000 people online last year. That's not me, ladies and gentlemen. That's God. That's all my faith, my family, my wife, all of that. That goes to them. So for me, I got into it for that, not knowing, having not a clue that I would be going down the road I am today, and I would learn not just about thermal imaging. I would learn about PPE. I would learn about fire behavior like I never understood before. I would get to hang out with some of the most amazing people who are phenomenal that the world doesn't even recognize, and I would get to learn from them and turn around and share with firefighters all over the world who are way more passionate and skilled than I am. So if you're passionate, don't give up. Go after it. Learn, share, but just make sure you protect your family and take care of yourselves in the process, because your gear protects you physically, but you got to protect yourself mentally and emotionally and spiritually. And that only comes from being grounded first at home. So everybody goes home is the motto of the NFFF, but you better make sure there's somebody home to go home to. So if I could leave them with anything, I would tell them really quickly that my passion goes deeper than a device that sees the heat. My passion goes to the people that I serve and the people at home first. So that's my quick little testimony of that. Sorry about being emotional, but that's just who I am.
Well, I'm hard to believe, but I'm almost speechless. That's very, very powerful. I have heard you speak in the past, and I love the way you put your emotions, you wear your heart on your sleeve. I think we all admire someone who's brave enough to do that and be able to, admit that we are humans and we need to have priorities. And I very much appreciate how you've put God high on your priority list, and that's helped keep you grounded. Can you share with us what your thermal imaging camera courses look to achieve? How much do you feel the average firefighter knows about that thermal imaging camera that they drag through fires with them every day?
You know what my ultimate goal is out of everything? To get them to carry the darn thing. Honestly, if I could get them to carry it and understand their camera, the brands and all that out of the way, are you carrying it as a company officer, and do you understand what it means? As Aaron Field says, we can't apply if we don't know why. We're taught to do sets and reps, sets and reps, sets and reps, till that's what we fail to as our base level. And that's phenomenal that we have to have that skill set. The problem I have is too many firefighters believe they don't need it. But if you talk to the military, you talk to the industrial world, you talk to high security responses, they're not going anywhere without their technology looking for them. They want to know, hey, we're going to cross this busy street and I've got my daughter in my hand. I'm going to look both ways before I cross this street. because I don't want to get hit by a truck or God forbid something happened to her. So what am I doing? I'm looking for things that can hurt me. The problem with the American Fire Service and internationally is that thermal imaging has been given a bad name because of the old antiquated uses behind it. Our curriculum focuses on showing firefighters, if they would just be able to understand what they're seeing first, the limitations, contraindications, and be able to look at that environment for a few seconds and make an educated, intelligently aggressive decision, it would enhance their decision making. They will find the fire faster, or find the victim faster. They'll do everything they need to do by just making a few second assessment and then putting the camera down. I don't want the camera glued to their face. I don't expect them to be a level 2 thermographer like I have. I have numerous certifications in thermography, which is the study of non-remote contact measurement of a device or an area through infrared, basically. But the only reason I did that is to understand what the firefighters need to apply. I had to take industrial concepts and correlate them to what we do, because there was no standard. There's NFPA 1801, which is how a camera is built, what the spec should be, and there's NFPA 1408, which is the training standard, which based on our study with Firehouse Magazine as of a few months ago, 40% of America didn't even know there is a training standard that requires them. They have to train and be educated on. They just hand them the device and say, here, have a nice day, read that little number in the bottom right-hand corner. So our curriculum educates them on the device, what they're seeing, how it can enhance their decision-making, but it doesn't make them an industrial thermographer. You got to have 32 hours of training in the industrial world to even hold one. Firefighters are lucky to get an hour or two. The majority of the U.S. fire services had zero or very little thermal imaging training, and if they did, it came from a salesperson or a manufacturer. And nothing against them. There's several that are phenomenal that I know and are good friends with, but they have limits on how much time their company is going to allow them to get. Our company does not. So we can give you up to a 32-hour course if you will allow us to. But the bottom line is just like I said about turnout gear, most of them hadn't even read the instructions. So we even made an instruction manual that reduced the entire instruction manual of the TIC down to 3 pages and laminated it. Because Bob, I bet you can vouch for this. How many map books did you see in your career that after a few months in the truck were all destroyed and tore up and the page you needed was ripped out? These books, we laminated them because we knew they were going in a fire truck, and we're not easy on things. So our goal is to get firefighters to understand technology is not going away. And those of them that argue with me and say, oh, technology, you shouldn't over rely on it. I'm like, you see this little thing called a smartphone? You have one of those? Yeah, I do. I said, give it to me. I'm going to take it away from you for a month. And I'm going to see how well you do without your over-reliance on technology concept. For me, I would like, my blood pressure would go down if you took my phone away because it stresses me out a lot of days. But point being is we all use technology. The key is to have a fundamental foundational skill set and use technology to enhance what you do, not replace what you do. There's always going to be the beating heart of a critically thinking, fundamentally sound firefighter underneath that gear, whether it's single layer, 2-layer, or whatever, hopefully responding to your home. And if they choose not to use these devices that they're given to them, that the taxpayers paid for, that enhance their decision-making and skill sets and can save your family faster or cause less property damage or put the fire out faster, what is a lawyer going to do with that eventually when they figure that out? You mean your fire department has the ability to do their job better and they choose not to because why? And they start giving antiquated, anecdotal information and answers that don't hold up or hold water in court of law. And I'm telling you, Bob, the fire service is the next litigation-rich environment. It's already happening in the rest of the world. My goal is to prevent that, number one, and two, create an educated marketplace that firefighters drive the manufacturers to make what they need instead of manufacturers telling them what they need. And they make better differences in the citizens' world for life-saving efforts they can through simply looking at the environment before they make a decision and saying, wow, I didn't see that 7,200 volt power line laying in the driveway. Wow, I didn't see the kid behind the corner of the door with the legs sticking out when I shine my high-powered flashlight in zero visibility smoke. I didn't see the 1,000-degree convection currents rolling over my head because it was zero visibility and I'm wearing 3-layer turnout gear that protects me so good I couldn't feel it. All of the methodology we've been using and teaching for firefighters to assess environments in zero visibility with high TPP turnout gear is turning around and ending up hurting them, because they train them in an environment that's completely different than the world they live in and face. And then they tell them to look or feel for things when they can't see or feel. So we're asking simply one thing: please look both ways before you cross the street, see the problem, fix the problem, put the camera down, use it as you need it. That's what we're trying to get them to do. And I am not here to tell anybody that we're keeping you out of the fire. We want you in there, but we want you in there with an intelligently aggressive purpose to get the victim out faster, put the fire out faster, and make a difference, which is the mission of the fire service. But yet, we still have people say, well, you can't use a thermal imaging camera. It's not going to make a difference. Very well. I understand. I cannot argue with them because they've made up their mind. But we continue to push out data and facts. And then eventually they have to agree with the overwhelming amount of data and facts versus opinions and bad experiences. So that's our goal, is to educate and help the fire service so they can do what they swore to do, period.
Thanks, Andy. You mentioned earlier, quoted Chief Brunacini from Phoenix about there's only two things that firefighters hate: change and the way things are, which of course, tongue in cheek, was lots of wisdom that Bruno gave out to the fire service, and surely he is missed. I know that you've been back out on the field, and now post-COVID, we're all starting to travel and meet people and socialize together. Can you think of, other than what that passion you have about, geez, let's at least carry the darn thermal imaging camera into the building? Culturally, do you have any other points that you have observed in your travels? And I know you get to go to all 50 states, so I'm sure you see very different philosophies and standard operating procedures. Can you think of any other cultural things that you think the fire service needs to adopt?
Oh, yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't know if we got enough time where I'm the right person to answer that, but as far as culturally, the thing we need to adopt is something a friend of mine, Chief Jason Coy, came up. He had a conference called Honoring Tradition and Leading Change. And I thought it was phenomenal because he had this infographic symbol in the background showing the first firefighter and what they wore, to 1970s firefighter, to 1990s, to what a firefighter looked today. And behind, inside of each one of those is the same beating heart, the same traditions and values that matter most. Those don't need to change. But what does need to change is we need to have an open mindset to learn. There are a lot of firefighters and speakers out there that are basically telling people one way or no way. Don't listen to anything else. I challenge people's paradigm, don't get me wrong, but I also challenge them to go and look up the information that I'm presenting to them, to not take it as the gospel, to look up the citations I provide for them, to go and read the research papers. But the sad thing is the majority of firefighters don't read that in depth because, number one, they don't have that much time, because 1.1 million of them are volunteers, which means they are already working a full-time job. Now you want them to read a 700-page research paper in their spare time instead of spending time with their kid on the playground. I can respect that. What I can't respect is that you're not even willing to read or listen to a differing viewpoint. We as a fire service don't choose who we respond to. We accept the call, we go, doesn't matter what race they are, what background, what politics, none of that. We show up and we make a difference, period. But we can't continue to do that if we're not open to learning and learning from other people outside of our fire department. I have learned far more from people outside of my box, so to speak, outside of my area code, than I ever did from people inside. Nothing against them, because I saw things differently. I saw different ways of doing things. I learned from their experiences, their wisdom, their research that we hadn't done. And the United States is just now doing research on things that has been done overseas since the 80s and 90s. So in regard to what the fire service is doing. So if we're going to change anything in the culture, as Chief Coy put in his conference, we need to honor the traditions, but we need to lead change in a bold, courageous way that allows people to have conversations without getting their feelings hurt and talking about their mama because you use the word smoothbore and I use the word combination nozzle, or you use the word thermal imaging camera and you use the word aggressive search without one. I can respect any vantage point as long as you back it up with data and you're civil. But I honestly think the culture of social media on the fire service is horrendous. We're supposed to be taking care of each other, and you can watch them tear each other apart online, but then they wouldn't speak to them face to face. And that is a hypocritical place to be. We need to be who we say we are the day we swore that oath and took that oath in front of the altar, in front of your wife and kids as well, or husband and kids. We need to be that person professionally, online, everywhere. And when we are doing what we're doing, what I see doing in this world today is we're not practicing what we preach. We say it's for them, but our attitudes, our actions, our behaviors are not. And I think if we're not careful, we're going to be lumped into another category where the public is not going to appreciate us. And that's one thing we should never throw away is the public trust. We've seen what's happened to that in the world today. We need to make sure that we continue to earn that and hold that trust and maintain our professionalism and be open to learning and differing viewpoints and not attack one another. So if we're going to change anything, I would change and make us more civil towards each other, because we're more civil to the citizen than we are to the guy on B shift. And that's just wrong. I think we need to fix that. And I don't know if I can fix that in my lifetime, but I can fix it in my firehouse. And that's what I'm trying to do, is maintain that level of compassion and understanding towards each other. And when someone doesn't understand something, it doesn't make them an idiot. It doesn't make them wrong. It just makes them different. And I need to seek first to understand, as St. Francis said, and then I can be understood. I shouldn't beat them over the head with my viewpoint until they get it. That doesn't work really well. You know, in my house, I could be right or I could be happy. Let me tell you which one I choose to be. I choose to be happy. So let's work on being happy and understanding each other, and we can fulfill the mission as firefighters and not tear each other apart. That's what breaks my heart in the fire service. That's the cultural thing that needs to change. Sorry for the mini sermon.
No, that's quite all right. I laugh because everybody picks on B shift. Why is it always B shift we use as an example all the time? It can't be the same guys in every fire department on B shift are the same way. As, you know, as my friend Kevin Roach used to say, the only thing we can say absolutely about every fire department in the United States is that there is nothing you can say absolutely about every fire department in the United States. We are very different. And it can't be always B shift, but that's a funny kind of stereotype. We give those B shift guys not enough credit. In FDNY, we didn't have A, B, and C shifts. We had 25 different groups, and we worked with any combination of them on any given day. So I laugh, and I get quite a kick out of how the nation of firefighters always talks about those B shift guys.
I was on the for 13 years. I can pick on them because I was one.
Okay, good. So trying to get back full circle about this podcast that was about alternative PPE. And I think it ties in exactly to what you just talked about, culture change. It requires an education. It requires an ability to respect tradition, but also understand the current state of affairs that's affecting firefighters. If you're passionate about your firefighters, you understand that the number one thing that's killing them in the United States is heat stress. It's cardiac incidents that are killing firefighters more than any fire that we respond to. And if we really want to make a difference and we want to leave a legacy for our fire service, we need to take a look at that single layer and even double layer PPE that does not have a thermal. There's no need for a thermal barrier on EMS calls. And as you just said, most departments like yours are responding. 80% of their calls that go out the door are EMS runs. In FDNY, the only PPE we have is station wear and 3-layer structural gear. It behooves all departments to take a look and see if we can make a difference by reducing that cardiac stress on our firefighters and finding a way to reduce their exposure to possible carcinogens that get trapped inside our structural gear, and not only protecting the public better, but protecting our firefighters and making that cultural change. Can I get your summation about my little gospel I just stood on your pulpit for a few seconds?
It's not mine. You can stand on all you want. I like it. My father has a saying that sums it up well. In Project Gila Flash Server, their simple mantra was, we test, we demonstrate, we share, and you decide. So in order for the fire service to have an open mind and test different things, they first have to test it. I see fire departments do a tremendous amount of work in hose testing and speccing apparatus. But then when it comes down to certain things, certain tools, very little research is done more than what the salesperson tells them. So yeah, put together a committee, put together a group of subject matter experts or passionate guys and gals in your department. Let them test it out. Let them give you the good, the bad, and the ugly. Pick your top 3. Do the things you need to do. But we need to actually see, is this going to work for our context, for our training, for our staffing, for our budget? And the big one, as you know, Bob, is the member's going to buy in. You can buy the best thing since sliced bread and tell them they have to wear it, and they can still choose not to wear it. Not that firefighters are rule breakers by any means, but we're that arrogant and prideful in certain things that we will push the limit and say, nope, I won't wear it. I mean, you got firefighters today still not wearing hoods. I have it in my PPE presentation. They won't wear a hood in a fire, but they'll wear 3 hoods in a training fire. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So we have to be able to be open, and we have to test these new things, not just buy them because, hey, I saw it on Facebook or I saw it online. Go test it. Is this going to work for your department? Talk to other departments that have done it. Get their good, bad, ugly horror stories. They'll tell you what not to do. That's the beauty of the fire services. When I wrote our behavioral health program for our department, I didn't know what to do. I called a Mayday and got all the different departments that had done stuff, and they let me have their information and said, do this, don't do that. This is what we did right. This is what we did wrong. That is the beauty of social media in that respect, that there are many people willing to share with you their mistakes, their successes, and their failures, and say, hey, please don't do what we did. And I think to get single layer or 2-layer gear or different types of gear where firefighters begin to understand it and care for it and use it properly, it's going to take, as David Eskew, a friend of mine from Milliken, says, I'm neither interested in education or innovation. I'm interested in both. If you have an innovative product and you don't educate the consumer on it, it's a waste. They'll never appreciate it and they won't use it correctly. So we need to have the innovative gear that you described, Bob, but we need to focus just as much on educating the consumer. Because if you value something tremendously and as passionate about as we are about this topic, but they aren't, why aren't they? One, they may not understand it. And if you don't educate them, it's our fault. They'll never see the value in the things we're trying to push and share to make a benefit if we don't come across, as you said in the very beginning, in firefighter speak, in ways we can all relate. We call that experiential relevance. It has to be something we can all relate to and understand how it will benefit us and fulfill the mission. And if you do that and they still decide not to, it's on them. But you have given them the facts, given them the data, shown them how other departments are doing it, and eventually people will change. It's just, you're going to have a few fence riders, you're going to have some that are the leading change agents, and you're going to have some that come dragging, kicking, and screaming into the 20th century, not even the 21st century. So, that's what I think we could do to help, is we could take what you said and say, let's educate people just like this podcast and others on different components of this aspect and why it is beneficial. The why is just as important as trying to get them to buy it. They won't buy it if they don't know why, and they don't know somebody who has used it. So I think that's where we should start, is educating our consumer, our public, and getting the public to buy in, because it's their tax dollars. It's not my money, it's their money. So let's remember that.
Well, when you come down to that, that's a very good point. I wanted to just touch on as we wind down this podcast. It's lots of studies have proven that you're actually saving taxpayers' dollars by not beating up that 3-layer structural gear on routine non-fire calls. You actually extend the life of it. With 1851, the NFPA standard on care and maintenance of your bunker gear, you're supposed to be putting it through a full cleaning after every exposure to smoke. That's going to shorten the life expectancy of bunker gear, which right now is at 10 years, down to around 4 years. So if we're going to beat it up so much on all those non-fire calls, you're actually saving the taxpayers money by providing firefighters with single layer or dual layer alternative PPE for those calls when you don't need to beat up that very expensive gear. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. And if you are at a busy department that sees a lot of fire, your gear, to your point, is not going to last that long anyway. Our Fire-Dex gear is 2 years old, and I'm already needing to replace mine because we've done so much burns with it. And, I took the moisture barrier apart and said, whoa, I ain't seen this back, because we've exposed it and exposed it and exposed it. It's a consumable, right? Departments can afford to do that. Whether it's air packs or turnout gear, you nailed it. They got to protect that investment by wearing it when we need to wear it, and then wear other gear when it's not called for, right? I don't wear a suit and tie to go play on the playground with my daughter, right? Because I only have a very few suit and ties. So I want to keep them nice. But when I need that gear, I need it to be well cared for and ready for service. And if we're doing, like I talked about in the beginning, wearing it for everything, not cleaning it properly, or even washing as much as you say, we are lessening the overall protection over time. And there are departments that have their gear sitting out in the bay without any UV tint on the windows and wondering why their gear looks like it's sublimation on one side, because the UV's killing their gear long before they take it into a fire. So I think your point is well made, is just we need to continue to educate the public, the firefighters themselves, because they're the ones wearing it, but they don't understand it as well as we should. And that's me included, because I didn't read the turnout gear instructions until 12 years ago. And when I did read that PHMSA manual, which is written for firefighters, I think three sentences, space, big letters, space, I went home and apologized to my wife because I thought I should be dead. And we need to educate firefighters on what their gear can and cannot do, and why an alternative like this is important, so that their gear is ready for battle when they do need to push it and make that save, or go a little bit farther to get that victim, or do what they need to do to save their own. So I think you're spot on, Bob. It's just we got to continue to educate firefighters in general.
I agree with you totally. Andy, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your insight, your experiences, and your knowledge of culture in the fire service. I think this has been a tremendous eye-opening experience for me, and I'm sure our listeners will agree. And so with that, I think this is a wrap. And thank you so much, Andy. Look forward to seeing you at one of our trade shows where we can all get together and chew the fat, as we like to say, and solve the problems of the world.
Thank you again. Appreciate it so much.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Rapid Fire. Follow Fire-Dex on social media or visit firedex.com for podcast updates or products and news.